Hello, I'm Joe Skiba. I'm an architectural illustrator. Today we'll be looking at how we produce this line drawing for this low aerial sketch. We'll be touching base a little bit on how we do the color at the end, but it's really a focus on view, prelim, final line drawing, and how we go through that process. We'll be using the iPad, an Apple Pencil, and the app called Procreate. Real quickly, I worked at an illustration studio called Anderson Illustration, doing digital rendering using Studio Max and Photoshop. Part of the studio was all watercolor, and we used some digital aspects within the watercolor work. In 2005, I started Urban Design Associates, drawing pen on paper using traditional watercolor media. And it was really here that the sense of place and the invention of architecture and storytelling came into play. As a team, we would oftentimes go on location, working with the mayor and the consultants and the public, producing the plan and the illustrations. And on location, we would draw on paper, color with traditional color pencil, and then we would come back to the studio and paint those drawings. And in 2013, we were still drawing on paper. Here's an aerial drawing. We're taking a look at it. It's fairly large. A typical desk setup looks like this. We have pens, paper, trace, rulers, your headphones. In 2015, things changed. The Apple Pencil was released, and we were drawing on the iPad and using the app Procreate. You could go anywhere. Your desk setup was super simple. You could be on the airplane, drawing. One of the key features of Procreate is setting up perspective assist or drawing assist, same thing. And then when you draw your lines, you're snapping to your vanishing points. You can have verticals. It sped up the process. You no longer needed a rolling ruler. Using layers and the quick menu, the production and quality really went up within the drawings. So this is simple, right? We're just going to draw and then we render. Okay, so how do we start? We're going to have two levels of finish. We're going to either do a colored sketch or we're going to do a colored rendering. Here's an example of a colored sketch. The architecture is hard lined, but the line is fatter. The line is a little softer. Here's another colored sketch, low aerial. Feels complete, feels correct. You zoom in, the shadows are a little blobby, but they're in the right place and they're headed in the right direction. Here's a colored rendering. Lines are thinner. When you zoom in, everything is a little tighter, edge to edge. Feels more complete. It's a higher end, it takes more time. Here's a low aerial rendering. And when you zoom in on the background, it has all the detail of the existing city. The foreground has detail. All these buildings were actually invented, but it does feel like a complete place. The sample project today is this low aerial. Part of the project was also producing a watercolored site plan. There are really 4 steps in the production. You're going to do a view selection, a preliminary drawing, a final line drawing, and then the final color work, which really is the most fun part. So view selection. Here's a couple of options we looked at with the client. Prelim drawing was produced for approval. Comments were made. Those comments were then incorporated into the final line drawing. The final line drawing was then partly colored on the iPad, and then the final color application was completed in Photoshop. This was concept architecture, and some materials and colors were applied to the building. The client saw this. Some small adjustments were made in Photoshop. We wanted to get the color of the site through there and some blue onto the buildings. Every rendering starts with a good drawing. Every drawing starts with a good setup. A proper setup is key to a good result. So here's our setup. This was provided by the client. We did a little on-screen meeting, talked about the existing building, the green spaces, the dog park, the retail on the ground floor. We want a hardscape coming through the front green area. We have a glassy hotel building that we wanted to represent. So we have our SketchUp model, and we need some information in the back. We need some existing context. So we're going to use Google Earth. You could use Google Maps in a browser. I like using Google Earth because you can save camera angles and you can change a millimeter of the lens. But once you have your view set, and we could have a whole tutorial on how to camera match these in Google Earth. But here's our camera angle, Aerial 03. You're going to save out your file, and you're going to choose a high resolution. You're going to turn off a couple of these options on the map so it has a nice clean export. You can turn off your roads, and then you're going to go ahead and click Save Your Image. So you have these two elements. You got Google Earth and SketchUp. And in Photoshop, you're going to combine these two. And this would be a typical layer setup where you're going to have a model, the existing, some people, and then you're going to have this grid layer. And this grid is set up from SketchUp, where you're going to align to key important parts of your building. And then you're going to copy these lines around and export this grid layer and put it in your file. This is absolutely totally not necessary. It just makes it easier to set up your perspective guides in Procreate. Now we're ready to import the file into Procreate. Here's Procreate. Select Import, select your file. It imports all the layers from the Photoshop document. You can see here's our grid layer. Let's set up our drawing guides. Here's our layers. That grid layer that we imported from SketchUp, we can duplicate it. If you set the layer mode to multiply, it makes those dashed lines a little bit easier to see. So we're going to click on Canvas, Drawing Guides, Edit Drawing Guides, Perspective. And this blue line on the top is our horizon. So we actually know fairly accurately where our first perspective point's going to go. So we have a 3-point perspective. We're going to add 3 points, one on the right, one on the left. Setting up this first one, you hit the second point over there. And again, we know where the horizon is. We want these 2 points, the left and right, to be exactly equal up and down, because that's really important for setting up the third point on the bottom here and keeping the entire drawing accurate. This bottom point is fairly difficult to set up just because it's so far away. You have to zoom in, you have to rotate the canvas so that you can pull it out a little bit. Once you do this, you're going to want to draw some test lines on a new layer. See how well they work, and then you're going to have to probably tweak it and adjust it a little bit. Make sure you take the time to do this. Make sure it's right. Okay, so the preliminary drawing. We made it. We're going to finally start to do some drawing here, right? So we're going to make a new layer and we're going to relabel it white. And then we're going to change our color to white and fill this entire layer. We tap on this little dot there, drag the white over, and we're going to click on our little N there, and we're going to set it to the opacity down a little bit. And this really just acts as our digital trace paper. We're going to make a new layer and we're going to label it line. And then we're going to use a 6B pencil and we're going to start drawing on this guy. Now we already set up our perspective guides. We got to, so when we start to draw the building, we can just snap right to those drawing guides. Perspective assist. It used to be called perspective assist. It's, if I say perspective assist or drawing assist, it's all kind of the same thing. And here we are. So we're going to draw with the red, and mentally the red to me says prelim. It actually allows me to draw a little faster because I know that this isn't actually the final line. And it also tells the client that this is still being worked on. We'll see a little bit later on that some of the line is actually drawn with black, and the red says it's an easy read. It says this is an idea. We're just working on these elements. We're going to draw some of the site in to sort of set this building down on, but this really just grounds us, gives us a good starting point. So here's our site, right? And we got some sidewalks in there. Getting some of these simple elements in there will help us dictate where the trees are going to go and some of the other elements. On the layer behind here, you can see some real light tree shapes drawn in on the background there. We are drawing the back part of the building, and it's drawn in black. So in the area behind is actually parking lot, using a little bit lighter line, trying not to attract too much attention to that. Our line, as it goes back, does get lighter. We have some foreground trees in here. We actually turned off the model. We're showing the full existing Google Earth image in there to draw those foreground trees. And those are accurate based on scale and size. Some cars for scale, giving the drawing a believability to it. So you got to do a little time lapse as you do these things, because it's a sort of a mental break. It shows you your start to end, and Okay, and here's the hotel building. We're gonna start drawing this hotel building. Real simple. We got floor lines in there from the SketchUp model. We're gonna break up those floor lines. We're gonna make a little glassy end on that building. Here's another proposed building that they asked for. So layers, and you got a couple layers. You put trees on a layer, building on a layer, the site on a layer, whatever makes it easy to draw this thing. Uh, the building and the trees are usually separate. Most people like to see transparent trees. So if you have your trees on its own layer, we're going to put some white in between the tree layer and the building layer, and that fades out the background a little bit. I slowed this down to a normal pace. I think I had gone to lunch at some point and came back to start drawing, and I was struggling a little bit creating these tree shapes. I drew them and I zoomed back out and realized that the marks are not the same, shape. They're actually a little bit darker. And the nice thing, right? I'm going to keep talking about the niceties of digital drawing, but you can actually go back in here and erase. I'm just double tapping on the pencil here and it's going from pencil to eraser. I love the double tap on the pen. It keeps your mind in the process. We're not going back and forth and switching tools. So here, and I'm just adjusting, making small marks, trying to get the shapes more in line with the rest of the trees, and trying not to put too much detail in on the vegetation because this is just a sketch. You don't want to draw a bunch of little tiny little leaf shapes because it just ends up making the marks look fussy, and it actually draws your attention to those fussy marks. And really what we want to do, we want the trees to be there, have place, but not be distracting. It's the environment, it's the character of the buildings, and it's the totality of the image that we want to sort of show and highlight. So we're drawing some of this background existing information in there. That's why it's so nice to have that file set up. We took a long time explaining the file setup and where we're going to go, but when we sit down to do the drawing, it's actually quite nice to have all that information in there. These lines are going to be lighter. And we're probably, 75% of the way through this prelim drawing, nearly complete. We're going to add some details in there, but we're real close to sending it off to the client for approval. Once we get the approval, we'll make some adjustments to the model and import that layer back into here. But you can see I'm drawing some green in on those trees, and that helps visually to have the image read. Okay, so the prelim drawing. Let's take a quick closer look at it. Here's our preliminary drawing, and we're going to go back to the SketchUp model and make some updates to it. And remember, this was one of the sample photographs that they provided as an example. So in SketchUp, we're going to add some additional components to it. We might even add some more people and some additional elements and then we're going to bring this layer back into our drawing. Again, the prelim drawing. Here's where we're going. Here's the final line drawing. Let's zoom in real quick and take a quick look. And you can see the level of detail in the people and in the trees, and you can see the transparency of the trees. Now remember, there's a white layer in between there so that we can adjust that transparency of the tree. Here's some background, a little bit lighter, less detail, less value. Here's our foreground building. We actually ended up changing this in the end after some final comments. And again, the entire full line drawing. Okay, so the final line drawing. Let's finish this guy up, get it off to the client for approval. First, we need to pull in a layer from the SketchUp update that we did. So we're going to insert that JPEG export, and we'll use that to draw the final building. And so here we go. Let's move all the way up. We got some changes to make to the site. Got to widen the road a little bit, and there's some signage that needed to happen there. And we're going to start penciling in the final building. And the exterior contour lines of the building are usually a little thicker, maybe a little darker. The windows and the porches have a thinner, lighter line. It's visually creates just a nice, easy read. We got a retail on that corner over there. And we're just going to work ourselves all the way around the building, putting in some porches. Really, nothing says residential building like having some porches in there. So let's just finish up this building. We'll just walk all the way around it, finish it up. This foreground building gets penciled in. We're going to zoom through this. It actually took a little bit to complete that bit, but it's done now. The background building goes fairly quickly. By the time you get to this point in the drawing, you don't need that many lines to represent window or bump out. The front park area is an active area. We're going to make sure we have enough people in there. We're going to put some people, some bikes in there. There's a little dog park. The client asked for a ton of people to be represented. And so, yeah, we're going to keep drawing. And you got some bikers in there. This background building wanted to have a porch on it, some outdoor seating. There's one new building that needed to be added here, and some existing that turns the corner a little bit. And just a ton of people. They just packed this guy full and full of people, right? And I did a quick export from SketchUp to do some shadow work. So this was just a layer brought in. It was set to multiply, and some dark was painted on this layer just to create a sense of turn and shadow, and creates movement across the image. It helps the eye to read, what's front, which side, which back, which pieces push back. And got some additional sight elements in there, and we are nearly done with this guy. Some small adjustments here and there just to finesse everything together. And there we go. And at the end, uh, I do a time lapse periodically throughout drawing the image. It just clears the brain, shows you where you're going, what you've been doing. And I think we're just about done here. And then, yep, and done. Okay, so the color application. This little segment's only about a minute or two. Just going to touch base on it real briefly. But essentially, we're going to put the roads on a layer, the roofs on a layer, the trees, the cars, the background. They all have their own layer. If you look in the top left corner of the screen, you can see some color swatches that I'm picking from. So the trees have a known color, which works out pretty good. And we're going to massage the shadows a little bit across the building. We're using the shadow work actually that we set up in the final drawing. And we're going to put some building color and building materials on here. We're going to color the glass, do a foreground shadow, just a fade, brighten up the mid area of the entry just to create a little bit of focus and liveliness to it. And then once we pull it back into Photoshop, we'll finesse the textures. Here we're almost in the Photoshop. Yeah, we're just going to finesse the textures. We're going to put a little bit of a border around it, make sure our name's on it, play around with the background a little bit, just tightening up things a little bit, not too tight, just sort of refining everything. And here's our final. And that concludes our presentation today. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to see more about the work or some more tutorials, check out the website at depiction.com. Until next time, have a great day.